All right, so welcome everybody to this month's Power Hour through Reloveution. We are talking about parenting and all of the things that happen when you try to be a parent and a leader. And so if you're joining this space live today and you are a parent yourself, you are in the right place. If you are a person who manages parents, you are also in the right place. Hopefully you'll be able to get lots of tidbits to not only support yourselves, but also to support the people with whom you work. We are joined today by Kimberly Didrickson, who is the founder of Learning Motherhood and also just an exceptional and wonderful and compassionate human being. It's been a pleasure to get to know her over the last few months. And she's doing really amazing work, and I'm going to let her tell you more about that work and how you might be able to integrate that into your workplace beyond the content that we are going over today. But I am going to turn this over to Kimberly, and thank you so much for being here, Kimberly. I'm not quite going to turn it over to Kimberly. Just a reminder that these spaces are designed for the first half hour to be dumping a lot of information on you. Kimberly might choose to engage with the group, but if you are in a place where you have to engage passively, that is absolutely all right. So the first half of our time together will really be focused on getting information, and then we will also have opportunities for you to ask questions in the second half. If you have questions in the first half, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will be monitoring that, and let's get started. So Kimberly, I'm passing it along to you for real this time.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Just to give you a little bit of background on me, as mentioned, I own a company called Learning Motherhood, and we are a family-friendly consulting firm that supports organizations bringing family-friendly programming to their employees. And we do that in a twofold approach. We really want to support the individual employee and humanize the workplace. So we provide resources and programming specific to the employee that does exactly that and helps them feel like they can have a career and work and be a parent. And then we also support organizations in terms of educating and really providing information to help them be a better resource for their employees. And that includes designing their workplace policies and really providing support on a consulting perspective to align better with industry standards, and also creating an environment that we're going to talk about today, which is workplace culture and how important that is. And so in addition to that, we have individual programming to support the individual working mom and parent. And that is really near and dear to my heart because I'm also a working parent. I started this company after working for a Fortune 100 company that I worked for 15 years. And there were a lot of things that I loved about that organization, but one of the things that was really shocking to me was how little there was support for the working parent. I sort of just assumed that existed and was completely shocked at the transition I went through when I became a parent, and in 2014 with our first child. And I was in leadership, and that was quite a reality check for me in terms of, what career represented for me, what now parenting represented for me, and how I as an individual operated. And when I looked to my left and my right and went to my employer, I saw nothing but you just power through. And I thought, there's got to be a better way. This can't be the solution. So shortly after, a couple of years later, I developed programming for the working mom, and it's evolved into our Family Thrive initiative that works with organizations. And today we're going to talk about leadership and parenting in the workplace. I'd love to hear in the chat, like, how many of you are parents, or how many of you support an employee community that does have parents on your team, just to get an idea as we kind of go through some of this, who I'm talking to. If you're all parents, then I know exactly. And if there are those that aren't, we have information in here for you too. So feel free to share in the chat. Okay, so great. So I see I support an employee who identifies as a parent, directly manages parents, is a parent, not a parent yet, would like to be. Okay, so we have a nice marriage of parents and non-parents on here. So this is great. Thank you all for joining. I love this. I love when we actually have a nice group that has both on here. So just to kind of dive in, one of the things that Marissa had asked me to talk about was really like, what does parenting represent for the workplace, the culture? And I think what's interesting about this is really what that means to really invest in making family-friendly environments, and what that does for the workplace. So why is it important to have a family-friendly workplace? The major things, and I've listed 4 of them, but the major things is reduction in turnover, decreased bottom line cost. When employees are happier, it's reflected in their work, and support building diversity in leadership roles and building gender equity in the workplace, including leadership. So I just went through that list really quick, but I want to flip back to the first one, because the first one seems sort of, when I was a leader, within the Fortune 100 company I was talking about, this sort of was like an oxymoron. It was like, well, if they're a parent, they're not going to be as committed, and they're most likely going to leave. And especially in that new parent phase. And that couldn't be more the opposite. If we're creating a really great workplace culture that shows that being a parent is an added value, then that reduction, you're going to have reduced turnover, like immediately reduced turnover. And it's all about how that's done, and how it's supported in the workplace, and what that culture looks like. And we're going to talk more about that through the next couple of slides, but that directly impacts the bottom line. So if you're in a position where maybe you're advocating for more parental leave in your organization, or you're advocating for another family-friendly programming like what we do at Learning Motherhood, knowing these numbers is so incredibly crucial. And in this case, when you have turnover, on average, to replace someone, it takes 6 to 9 months to get them up and running, to get them ready to go through the process of getting them trained. In that is the salary. These are, those soft costs that are so prevalent. That's time of you as a manager or your team supporting that new employee to get up and running. And it's also the work of all the support teams that surround that individual to get them ready. So there's quite a bit of cost with that. And depending on the salary, that can range between $60,000 to over $150,000 just for that employee that you lost. So these are those decreases of bottom line. And then we all know that when we have a culture that supports working parents overall, employees are happier. And why is that? Because some of the amazing things that working parents need are things that every employee wants. And so when we stop thinking of it as, well, they're getting, some additional support that the non-working parent is not, doesn't have access to. And we start saying these are things that everyone can have accessibility to, you see how amazingly it changes the environment and how people work. And when you have a happy employee, it's reflected in their work. I could immediately see like when an employee was thriving and doing well as a leader, and then I could immediately notice when they were not, when something was not right, something was wrong, and you could see it in their work. So these are another reason why that's so important. And lastly, because of turnover, because of all these pieces, our leadership is predominantly represented at one gender across the country. And we're desperately trying to change that to provide more gender diversity, create leadership that represents all employees, and building that gender equity in the workplace that will allow so many amazing ideas and support to represent all employees. So everyday events make parents incredible employees for an organization. And for the parents out there, I'm sure you know these, but these are really lessons that I learned at a very, very early stage in parenting, and then I'm challenged by this daily. I have 3 kids now. So I have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And for some reason, the 4 and 6-year-old do not get along. They're always at each other. It's quite an interesting experience, and the level of patience I am having, I'd much rather manage adults and navigate some of the challenging behaviors of sibling rivalries going on right now in my household. So that's just like one example, but patience and empathy and the ability to do hard things and leading through crisis. These are some of the things that many parents are really forced into at an early stage of parenting, and we are taught very early on how to navigate these and continue to learn how to navigate these, just as I was mentioning, now with even no more infants, I'm still navigating a lot of different pieces of this and continuing to learn. So we're doing on-the-job learning all the time. So when you think of your employees that are parents, there are things that on a skill capability level that are demonstrated consistently throughout the day-to-day. I don't know if anyone wants to add any in the chat, but if there's any that you feel are that you'd want to add of skills that make transfer to the workplace, I'd love to share them if you have any that you would like to add here. I'll pause for a second and see. I'm not always, I don't always like to be the only one talking. Multitasking, yes, that's a really great one. For sure. Thanks, Marissa. That's a huge one. Conflict resolution, another really big one. And so much of, the day-to-day negotiation, negotiating with a toddler. Let me tell you, that's an interesting experience, to say the least. Boundaries. That's a really good one, Helen. I definitely think establishing boundaries is one of those things that is really challenging as a parent, and also really rewarding when we've got them in place. Thank you, everyone. These were great ones. Yes, and Marissa added balancing accountability and discipline and love. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And so I think, like, when I think back to me in 2014 and when I was returning back to work, and feeling like not capable because all of a sudden my time was split in so many other directions now that I had this little human I was taking care of, and how helpful it would have been to know these things about myself and what I was bringing to the table in returning to work, instead of feeling less than confident, actually completely scared that I would be able to live up to the expectations that I had set prior to going on parental leave. And so when you're looking at kind of what leadership is, dynamic, and so are we, these are the things to just keep in mind. As a parent, you're managing several activities at once, you're navigating different personalities, as we talked about. There's a lot of highs and lows. So, I look at this as, in the workplace, we've experienced a lot of highs and lows. In the most recent years, a lot of lows, and how to navigate that as a parent has so many values and transfers into the workplace. And I added like some other ones, like we're predicting the future. We're always planning ahead. So we need to, we need to know like what's happening next month in some cases, because of all the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. Like when you have infants and toddlers, you're anticipating naps, feeding schedules, and hunger needs, always keeping the end goal in mind of healthy, safe, and adjusted human beings. So we're always trying to keep that in mind, and that transfers right into leadership, right? Like when you think of leaders, you think of those that are able to really kind of navigate change, anticipate the future, look at like what can be beneficial for the employees and the greater good of the community. You go through those highs and lows, you're navigating different personalities, you're managing several different activities. These are all things that make a great leader. And that is why I wanted to emphasize that too, for whether you're a parent thinking of being a leader, or you're a leader right now and thinking of like who on your team would be an added value to continue to promote and grow. These are things that are really beneficial for the next step. So let's talk about what separates a bad leader from a good leader. I like to say that a good one inspires, encourages independence, and that's motherhood and that's fatherhood, right? Like, and that's all genders. It's really looking at that, however you're identifying yourself, but overall, it's that inspiring and encouragement that is really huge. So then we look at like, what is a bad leader? I would say consistently, whenever you do a survey of leadership, and we did many of them, and leadership surveys that are out there now, you will say, generally speaking, employees say micromanagers, as the want to take on too many things at a time too. So when I looked at leadership qualities, you look at kind of like what you can manage yourself, but also what you can really distribute to really work on the things that are hugely important. And, we don't want to be micromanaged because we can't. We do not have the time for it. We're forced to hone in on these skills and foster independence and inspiring our children in order to survive career and parenting. So I think giving that autonomy for working parents is such a huge piece, but it's for everyone, right? And that going back to how do you support working parents on your team, but how do you create a workplace culture that works for everyone? A lot of this is really transferable to every employee and creating an environment that works for everyone. Because ultimately, when you look at this, you're also looking at like, what are the things that you maybe I think I saw in the chat, I'm not a parent yet, but I want to be. And so, a workplace that they're in, they want to see that environment be something that they can grow with, not just professionally, but with their family. But why do working parents leave organizations? So, if we're able to really show like how we want to support, it's a very different scenario. But the reason why they leave is unrealistic expectations for ourselves with work and family. So, they're not able to meet the needs of what's being asked. And there's no communication on how to support them through it. Feeling like you have to hide your family, and it takes a mental toll on your physical and mental health when you feel like you can't be 100% present. At Learning Motherhood, we talk about humanizing the workplace, and the importance of showing, what happens outside of work in a constructive way, and how important that is to really make sure that there's synergy there, to know that you can have a career and you can also have a family. And this idea of doing it all the time and impossible to ask for anyone. There's the grind of having work and family and really finding a nice boundary around it, as we were talking about earlier, is so crucial. And when those boundaries are completely non-existent, the impact is like this work is unattainable. And that is where schedules really become impossible, and they're looking for their next opportunity outside of the position they're in. So now what? How can you as a parent lead a team or support parents on your team? Well, there's several things. I think as a parent, being confident about who you are, what you bring to the table, and that you deserve to be in that room is hugely important every day. Your parenting skills add value to an organization, and you are bringing valuable resources to an organization by all the skills you are doing on a day-to-day basis inside the workplace and outside the workplace. Efficiency is your best friend. We can't do it all, and nor should we. And so leveraging the things that make it easier, like having a support team, like having at work and at home too. As a leader, I remember working with a parent who was struggling she felt like she had to sort of do everything to prove that she was worth the career that she was building. And we talked about how to really transition some of the workload to some of her support team, because she didn't need to do everything. There was a team there ready to support her. And so that's an example, like this need to prove your worth. You can prove it in many other ways. It doesn't have to be that you have to do everything in order to do that. And then if your work has a leadership group, or you can be a part of a parent ERG to feel like you have the support of other parents, I think it's incredibly crucial. And then this is a big one, and this is something that I worked with teams all the time with, is always share your wins. As sometimes that's hard to do. Your male counterparts are doing it too. There's really a huge impact to do that. Women, for whatever reason, sometimes have a tendency not to share all their wins for those tier manager, for those to share them as a team leader, the wins that your team is having. Make sure that you really show it. It's hugely important for the team morale, and then also on a leadership level has such an impact. And I will say that, you know, speaking of this with fathers, this is such a crucial piece, because there's also this undertone for fathers in many cases where they feel like they can't always show their fatherhood. Even out, it's interesting, out in California, we have a really great parental leave policy for all genders, and fathers still are only taking an average of 2 weeks. And the reason behind it is that they feel that they're going to be, they're going to have their own discrimination. You know, they're not going to be up for that promotion. They're not going to have that opportunity to go to the next project that's coming through, that somehow it's going to impact their income. And so showing that it's okay on all genders to be themselves, to show that they're a family, they can have a family, is crucial, so that everyone can have access to the resources and support provided. And then leading a team with parents on the team. So you as a leader, if you don't have parents, if you're not a parent right now, it's still important to set those boundaries. I was a leader before I was a parent, and this is something I wish someone had shared with me, so that I could have better set the stage for that culture that is so crucial. I wish it wasn't after I had a child that I understood it. I wish I had gotten this information prior, that someone had shared this. So as a leader that does have a team with parents on it, it's important for you as a leader to still set boundaries. Maybe you can jump on your computer after hours and it's no big deal, and you're sending emails, and it's something that you're fine doing, but maybe that's not ideal expectation for the working parent on the other end, feeling incredibly, they're doing bath time and bedtime, and they're feeling like they're not doing enough to support you as a leader. And so, you know, setting those boundaries. My boundary was always, after becoming a parent and realizing this, my boundary was always, hey, I am not going to send emails at night. What I am going to do is I will do my emails if I have time, but I will set them to go in the morning. So I'll still, if I want to work at night, then I'll do that on my own, but as a leader, I will not send them at night. I don't want anyone to feel that pressure to respond to me that evening. Another thing that I've seen people do is, you know, my work hours might not coincide with yours. Please do not feel pressure to respond on their email signature. So, you know, there's different ways of doing that. That was my thing. I would just set them for the next day as an example. Humanize your experience as a leader versus hiding it. You know, whether you're a parent or not, you also have life outside of work, and, you know, showing that has value demonstrates to your team the importance of your own goals outside of work. And so family and work deserve to be integrated, not separated. And then provide that flexibility. I remember distinctly, this was another leadership fail of mine prior to having kids that I wish someone had told me. I had meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning in an office. I know that looks different now, but I'm just giving an example. In an office, and there were parents that had to drop off their kids at school. And I didn't understand, like, why can't you drop them off earlier? I just really was completely clueless. And it was a really I wish I could go back in time and change like how I handled that. But again, as I wasn't a parent, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. And I wish someone had gave me these tips and tools so that I could have done that differently. And no, you can't drop off your kids earlier in many cases. So that is so desperately needed to give start meetings a little bit later so that parents can drop off their kids and they can be present for those meetings. It is quite an obstacle to kind of navigate that morning. So that's a huge win to help retain and support your parent community. And also, you know, employees that aren't parents, that gets them whatever, you know, the luxury of what they can do too in the morning. I think it's a win-win either way. And make sure if you have new parents, please make sure you're checking on them weekly as they return from work. It is quite a transition. And I know this topic specifically isn't necessarily about that transition. That's a huge focus at Learning Motherhood with our new parent programming that we offer for companies. And it's a big one. So oftentimes we do, hey, welcome back. We're so glad to see you. We've missed you. And all that parent sees is an insane amount of workload that they've missed. And somehow they're gonna navigate how to do that and all that work that they missed. And then also somehow go home and get 3 hours of sleep that night. So, you know, how you support that parent during that transition will make or break whether they stay at the organization or not. And I think that's it. You know, you deserve to thrive as a leader, and so do your team. So I hope this was helpful with some tips and tools to support this. And I'm grateful to talk to everyone. I'm happy to open it up to questions or thoughts, or would love to hear from you guys. Marissa, bounce it back to you. She's there.
Yeah, so this is the opportunity for folks to be able to ask Kimberly all of the questions. That was super informative. There were lots of things that I know that I hadn't thought of. And so if you came into this space today with an objective and you are hoping to learn something more, this is the opportunity to ask those questions. And you can do so in the chat, or you can do so right out loud. Practice that courage muscle. So what questions are there?
Or comments, anything?
Yeah, observations. Yeah, Amanda, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks very much for speaking with us today. This is maybe okay. So if you had a magic wand and you could fix any policy that was making it hard for parents in the workplace, like what would it be, right? Because I'm trying to think of also like structural things that we can also advocate for or support.
Yeah, so I would like to say two, if that's okay. So the first one I would say is parental leave for all genders and longer. So those would be the two things. So typically it's either 6 weeks or 12 weeks. And for fathers, it's even less, and it already creates that gender disparity because of that, specifically in the workplace. And the next one would be flexibility, and really feeling that that's accepted and welcomed versus sort of something that's put out there, but not really accepted in the workplace culture.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question. Like, my company is sort of an interesting spot. So I work in education, but I work for a nonprofit specifically. And we sort of have a reputation that I think is in some ways well-deserved of like, it's a place people come to start their families because our leave policies are much, much, much better than you would get in most schools or districts or like state education offices. And so it's not uncommon that we hire someone and within the first year, they are out on leave, or like we've hired people who we know are going to be on leave. And that's great. And I think I mean, it's sad in some ways that like people have to leave oftentimes roles and institutions that they love because they don't feel like they will get the type of respect and balance that you're talking about, right? And so they have to make a change. The question I have, not that I'm really in a total position to change the organization, but I'm curious, and what I can do is that does often mean there can be an underlying conflict or tension between the people, like the people who have chosen not to start families, who then feel like they're surrounded by people who are coming in and out of leave, right? Or like coming coverage. And they've started to bridge that gap even with sort of like you're saying, sort of the flip side of like compensating people for covering work while people are out on leave, right? Is I think actually a policy that's often overlooked, right? Like it's one thing to make sure that folks can take the time they need, but also that the people who are covering whatever's happening while that's happening also are treated with respect and can still maintain their boundaries. So sorry, this got rambly, but my question is essentially like, have you seen that tension before? And do you have any tips for like how to navigate that, both on like an individual level, like within say a smaller team, but also like organizationally? I don't think it's something we've grappled with. And I think it does hold back our ability to collaborate when people have these sort of like underlying like ouches.
Yeah, I think that that's a real issue actually, especially as more work family friendly policies come out. And going back to sort of what I was saying in the presentation is it's all how you kind of position things. So in your case, I think having just a real understanding, okay, this is underlining, and now like let's figure out how to bridge the gap. So what I would do in that scenario is I would say, okay, what are the things that are really making them upset? Is it so if it's only workload, then what do we do to really make sure that we're redistributing and balancing and compensating? But if it's also like, well, they got to leave early and I have to stay, like that's not fair, then maybe it's really kind of evaluating what is that the workplace policy in terms of flexibility. Again, going back to the idea of like these policies, well, there are some things that are really specific to, being a parent, but overall, these policies can really support everyone. So that flexibility could be an example of that. Like maybe we need to reevaluate our flex schedule to incorporate everyone being okay with like having to leave early for whatever needs they have, or maybe it's something for an overall policy. I don't know how, like one of the things one organization did is they had half day Fridays, and that was just for everyone. It didn't matter. Or it was meeting hours are between 9 and 12, and then, you're on your own essentially. Things like that. This is also like manager training, which is something we do, is really, you have to kind of work with managers to really change that culture, because the individual manager definitely has such an impact on that. So if you have a working parent manager that maybe is kind of leaning towards being okay with a working parent leaving early, we have to really look at like, what does that mean for the other team member and what sort of support can we give them as well? But I hear you, because I know that's a real reality. I don't know, was that helpful as
It is helpful. And it does actually make me think like, it's definitely tied, and maybe invisibly tied to like, we have such a strong meeting culture in my organization. So if you feel like meetings are the only way you can get work done, and then you're hampered in your ability to schedule meetings with certain sets of people, then it's like it shouldn't be surprising to us that like tensions arise, because we haven't come up with good other ways for work to get done asynchronously. And so then, yeah, it's not surprising to me, but I hadn't quite explicitly made the connection between those two things.
Yeah. And that's been something that's been really great for overall for an organization to sort of set those boundaries on when meetings are. So everyone knows the expectation within the org. And then even on a team individual basis, like for when I was leading teams with parents and non-parents, Mondays and Fridays, we didn't have meetings, but we had meetings Tuesday through Thursday, but they were 10 to 2 was the window that you could schedule meetings. And so everyone knew that expectation that was just like out there. And of course there was an exception to the rule, but overall that was the expectation. And so we didn't have that much conflict because of that. It was more so the things that I was talking about where I scheduled a meeting at 8 o'clock. Like, I mean, that's completely unfair for, someone to drop off their kid. And yeah, I've backpedaled quite a bit and apologized and all those different things, but you live, you learn. So hopefully this is, you learn before you live it,
Yeah, I was just going to say, Kimberly, I think it's a really good point about like the flexibility being a benefit for all employees, right? Because like if that expectation is just like everybody's an adult, and if everybody is getting their tasks done and like accomplishing the things that they need to accomplish, like does it matter that Sarah leaves at 4 to pick up her kid? You know what I mean? Like, and there's a team member of mine who just found out like her child's school district, they have a bus driver shortage. Her child doesn't have a bus home 3 days a week. And so like that has obviously thrown a wrench into her whole plan, but it's like one of those things where thankfully on my team, everyone is very like, yeah, if you need to run out and do something, like block it off on your calendar so that you're not, missing a meeting or something like that, but make it work. But I think, and that flexibility like benefits, everyone, whether you're a parent or caregiver or just like have a busy full life, and need to set those boundaries and get things done.
Yeah. And that's such a good point because caregiving also represents this too. If you have an aging parent, an aging grandparent, like whatever the scenario is, that's why, kind of putting some of these policies in for all are so hugely beneficial and will benefit the workplace culture specifically. And it's okay to put like, subsidy for childcare and caregiving subsidy, and then, support like what we do at Learning Motherhood. It's okay to put those like pieces together on top of that to layer it, but having some of these really structural opportunities to really support everyone is massively important. Anyone else? Or want to share like that was a great share, actually. I mean, I think that's.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that one of the things that we encourage organizations to do, and I guess this is it's sort of a one-off thing, but it's also something that could be systemically integrated, is when organizations require an after work happy hour or a week-long retreat or something that requires childcare or even pet care, right? I ask them and encourage them to include a line item for support, giving a subsidy to be able to support that in their budget line. And we don't really think about what it takes for a parent to have to come to that happy hour or go to that weekend activity or barbecue. And if they are having to spend resources or mental energy lining that stuff up, those are things that we want to be conscious of. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I'll just add to that. I think as a leader, if you're kind of with team members that are newly in parenting or coming on board and they're a parent, making sure that you're oversharing the policies of what programs and support your organization offers, and constantly reminding, maybe in your six month review, and if it's a new parent, maybe every month, because those policies are there to be a benefit. And if they don't know about them and they're not really aware of them, then they also will think that the company doesn't support them and then they'll leave. This has happened at some of my clients who work at law firms. They were like, wow, I had no idea I could have had a transitional schedule back to work after parental leave. They only found out after they were back by a coworker, not from the partner in the firm, not from HR, not from benefits, but a coworker. And so, you know, those things, they might be in the employee handbook, but they're not something that, I mean, how often are we reading the employee handbook? It's very few in between. So, you know, making sure that as a leader, we're sharing those, that's a huge, huge benefit that so many people don't take advantage of. Anyone else? How many are managers here? Okay. Okay. How is it on the team? Like, do you see the dynamics after the pandemic feeling stronger, or did you see a shift in how the team worked together? Anyone?
We, well, with my team, my department, we're now all completely remote. So we moved from in office to temporarily remote during COVID to, you know what, we're just going to keep on being remote. And that has definitely helped, I think, the parents in the organization. Like, I speak more for myself. My direct report is a parent, but her children are grown. So that's a very different situation than when you have children still at home. But she still needs, like you mentioned before, my direct report needs the flexibility to deal with aging parents. Like, her 80-year-old mother had a fall, like, and she lives like 6 hours away, but because we're remote, she can go and work from her mother's house for a week while she helps her mom get to the appointment, doctor's appointments, and all that stuff too. So it's just having that remote, I think, really helps, you know, people, you know, sometimes it's the same challenges, whether you have an 18-month-old child or a 70-year-old parent to take care of. You know, it's just still, but it's the being remote has definitely helped the parents with the flexibility, I think, and with kind of, you know, different issues like that.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's, you know, going to what we were talking about. And I just curious, like, now that I actually just did a podcast episode on this, like this idea of quiet quitting and firing. And so we were talking about quiet quitting. We were actually talking about sort of like this idea of like when you used to all be together as a team and now you're no longer together as a team, and the impact that has on building continuity with your team. So just curious, do you see your team like still collaborating even though now they're remote, or do you
think so?
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. Just because like the person who reports like directly to me, like she and I were never in the same physical location. So even when we went to the offices, our offices were 2,000 miles apart. So we've always had that virtual culture because I work in a large organization that has employees like all over the country. So we were never physically in the same place. Like we've never met like in person. So it's always kind of been relying on that. And I think because that was the norm, it really doesn't matter. So I'm probably not the best person to answer that question.
That was the case for me too. So I was just, and that was like way before the pandemic. We were sort of like, it was a satellite office, but has anyone experienced any change or no? Good.
I think yes and no. It's been unequal change because similar to Danielle, like some people in my organization were in that situation, but a lot of folks worked in our national office. And so, for example, my direct report, who's a parent, went on parental leave March 7th, 2020. And and then came back to work a couple months later to a reduction in force, a closure of office, right? Like a virtual, like a lot of things. So that was definitely, I know she had a much harder transition than a lot of folks because so many things changed all at once and they all changed while she was gone, right? And so I think for her, it's taken a little bit more to get back in a groove, so to speak, of like collaborating with others when they're not right next to her versus like the people who had already been like, I already had most of the people I worked with that were already not in the office that I was in. And actually I had moved across the country a couple months before the pandemic. So it's definitely been varied. And we've tried to, you know, accommodate, like not accommodate, but like figure out how to work together again, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like learning a new skill. I feel like, you know, if it's something that you're not used to, and I think even for leaders, that's something that if you weren't used to that, if you were used to having your team in person and then now you're not, and kind of navigating that structure, there's so many benefits, right? Like we just talked about so many, but there's also just like making sure the team cohesively works together, and it's a different skill set. So I was just curious because you know, quiet quitting it's such out there right now as a topic of conversation. And with this change of, you know, how we work now and how we support parents, but also just employees in general, it's evolved in such many amazing ways, but there's also like some things that you're expected to know how to do. You're expected to know how to like still build the same sort of culture. And if you weren't used to that culture before, you were used to seeing someone in the office and having that like moment where you're having coffee or like knocking on that door and going into your manager's office and like, hey, can I talk to you about this scenario for a second? And that doesn't exist anymore. How are you building that outside of it? It's not as simple as that was before. So anyway, thank you all for sharing. I know we're almost up on time, but I've really enjoyed getting to know everyone, and I really appreciate, you know, your time and you sharing. And you know, if you have anything that you need from me or questions that you have, I'm here in any shape or form. My website, I'll put it in the chat here. And I don't know,
And
Marissa,
Kimberly,
if you have
yeah,
anything
I
to
just
say.
know, if you want to just give like a very Cliff Notes version of what your company offers in case people want to drop it off on their boss's desk tomorrow, or later today. What are the 2 or 3 things that you do that people might want to follow up with you about?
Yeah, so we do training to support creating stronger workplace cultures that support working parents, but also navigate some of the things that we talked about today. Like, how do you navigate, you know, an employee that is a working parent and an employee that's not, and how do you create a culture that works for both? We do consulting for organizations on their parent-friendly policies. And then we also do new parent programming and workplace talks. So our new parent programming is a membership offering, very similar to a benefits offering. And it incorporates coaching, transition back to work after having a baby for the employee, and then also humanizing the workplace experience with all the things that encompass what your employee is going through, but is not sharing at work and is somehow trying to navigate at home. So we want to keep that employee with your organization. So providing these services will do exactly that. And then we do workplace talks. So we do those in increments of quarterly, every month, or a 6-month run of that. And that can range from all ages of parenting. And it's a great way to really capture everyone in the group. So I think I covered some of the key components there.
Yeah,
Training, parental leave, and new parent programming.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for joining us today. For those of you who are not familiar with our power hours, and this is your first time, we come together once a month on a topic of interest. Next month's, I should have had this up already. Next month's is on October 18th, and the topic is how can I overcome the stereotypes about being a millennial at work? So that's very specific in terms of age range, but we hope that you will join us. Same time, same place, same link. And thank you for taking this hour to be with us today. And please reach out if there's anything else that you need. We will see you soon.